Inside America's deadliest prison, Riots. Survival at any cost. The prison yard is chaos. Flames rise from a housing block, smoke choking the air. Inmates scream as they rush through the yard with pipes and broken chairs. Blood stains the cracked concrete. One man is trapped against the razor wire, surrounded by shadows of other prisoners closing in. The world outside has no idea, but inside the deadliest prison in America has just become a war zone. But this riot didn't start with fire. It began with small sparks. Food rations were cut, showers shortened, and medical requests ignored. Guards mocked inmates instead of helping. Each insult, each punishment, planted seeds of anger. The cell blocks buzzed with whispers of rebellion, an unspoken countdown no one could hear but everyone could feel. In the kitchen, an inmate slid an extra loaf of bread under the counter to another man. In the yard, stolen keys quietly changed hands. A supply cart tipped over, supposedly an accident, but prisoners pocketed what they could. Staff brushed it off as bad luck. The inmates knew better. These were signs. Morning came and a rumor spread fast. The warden had ignored another demand for basic rights: no extra food, no better health care, nothing. The news fueled rage. Gangs who once fought each other now started making silent agreements. Enemies became allies, united by hate for the system that caged them. It exploded in the yard. A guard stepped in to break up a shouting match. A punch flew, then another. Suddenly, 2 men became 20. The yard roared with violence. Guards blew whistles, but their voices were drowned by chaos. Radios screamed for backup, but reinforcements were too far away. Then came the breaking point. A correctional officer was dragged down. His baton clattered against the ground as fists and boots rained down. Prisoners snatched his keys and radio. In that instant, control shifted. The guards no longer ruled the prison. The inmates did. The stolen keys slid into the first lock. The heavy door creaked open. Dozens of men flooded out of their cells, shouting, swinging, running for survival and vengeance. The riot had truly begun. The sound of iron echoed through the block as the first cell door creaked open. Dozens of men poured out, eyes wild, fists clenched. Some carried sharpened scraps of metal. Others gripped pipes ripped from broken sinks. The hallway became a flood of bodies, and for the first time the guards weren't in control. Shouts bounced off the concrete walls. "Free us all," someone yelled. More doors were forced open with the stolen keys. Within minutes, hundreds of inmates filled the tiers, rushing down staircases, pounding on locked gates. The noise was deafening, like a storm tearing through steel. In the middle of the madness, not every prisoner joined in. Some men pressed against the back of their cells, terrified. They wanted no part of this war, but the choice wasn't theirs anymore. The riot didn't care about fear. It swallowed everyone in its path. Down in the medical unit, a small group of inmates broke through the doors. They raided shelves, grabbing pills and syringes. What they didn't swallow, they stuffed into their pockets, trading them for protection as the riot spread. Others grabbed sheets and ropes, already plotting ways to block entrances and trap guards. Guards tried to regroup at the control station. Their radios cracked with desperate voices. "We're losing C block. Lock it down, lock it down." But it was too late. The mob was moving faster than their orders. With each passing minute, another section of the prison fell. Then came the moment that shocked even the rioters. A group stormed the guard tower overlooking the yard. They dragged one officer out, tearing off his uniform shirt. His vest and helmet were ripped away as prisoners raised their stolen weapons high. The message was clear. They had conquered the symbol of power inside the prison. From that tower, a flare gun was fired into the night sky. It exploded red above the prison walls, lighting the yard in an eerie glow. Every inmate knew what it meant. The takeover was real. The prison was theirs, at least for now. But with victory came something darker. If the guards couldn't stop them, who would? And how long before this war turned prisoner against prisoner in a fight to survive? The red glow from the flare lit the prison yard like a warning from the heavens. For a moment, the inmates cheered, screams of victory echoing through the broken windows. But the celebration didn't last long. The reality of what they had done sank in. The guards had fled, but now there was no one to stop the storm inside. Gang leaders moved fast. In the chaos, they started carving out territory. The Aryan Brotherhood locked down one corner of the cell block. The Latin Kings controlled the kitchen. The Bloods rallied in the yard, shouting for numbers. Each group gathered weapons, pipes, broken glass, shivs carved from toothbrushes. Inmates not tied to a gang scrambled for safety. Some begged to be taken in. Others hid under bunks, trembling as footsteps thundered past their cells. In this new order, being alone was dangerous. Without a group, survival was almost impossible. Inside the kitchen, a fight broke out over food supplies. A mob of prisoners rushed the pantry, throwing bags of rice and bread into their arms. Another gang stormed in from the other side. Shouts turned to fists, fists turned to blades. Blood splattered across the kitchen walls. The fight for food had begun. Back in the yard, a lone guard remained trapped. He had been cornered in a storage shed when the riot exploded. Now, inmates banged on the metal walls, laughing, taunting him. He shouted into his radio for help, but only static came back. His voice grew weaker, drowned by the pounding fists outside. By midnight, the prison was unrecognizable. Fires burned in multiple blocks, smoke curling through shattered skylights. The sirens outside wailed, but no rescue came. The outside world knew the prison was lost. For now. Then came the moment that sent chills through every prisoner's spine. A rival gang armed with sharpened steel stormed into a block controlled by another group. The clash was brutal. Screams echoed through the concrete halls as the riot shifted from prisoners versus guards to prisoners versus prisoners. And in that moment, everyone realized the deadliest fight wasn't for freedom. It was for survival at any cost. The hallways shook with violence. Rival gangs stormed each other's territories, swinging pipes, smashing bottles, stabbing with sharpened metal. The sound was deafening, screams, footsteps, steel crashing against steel. The prison was no longer a correctional facility. It was a battlefield split into war zones. Inmates scrambled to build barricades. Metal bunks were flipped and shoved against doors. Mattresses soaked in water were stacked to block flames from spreading. Each gang turned their block into a fortress, daring anyone to cross the line. But survival wasn't only about fighting. In one corner of the prison, a small group of prisoners searched for water. The taps had been shut off, leaving everyone thirsty and desperate. They broke open vending machines, filling bottles with soda and juice. Others ripped open medical cabinets, swallowing painkillers just to numb the fear. Meanwhile, the trapped guard in the storage shed grew weaker. Hours passed, and he sat in the dark, clutching his radio like a lifeline. The banging on the walls outside had stopped, but silence was worse. It meant the inmates were planning something. He whispered to himself, praying someone would come before morning. In the yard, the gangs made their next move. They dragged out tables and chairs, setting them on fire as torches. Flames lit their faces as they painted signs of power, symbols scrawled across the walls, claiming the prison as their kingdom. The air smelled of smoke, sweat, and fear. Then came the most brutal turn yet. One gang leader ordered his men to storm the infirmary. They weren't looking for medicine. They were hunting enemies who had taken shelter inside. What followed was pure chaos. Beds overturned, glass shattered, men dragged screaming into the halls. The infirmary turned into a slaughterhouse. As dawn approached, the prison looked like a war-torn city. Fires burned unchecked, windows shattered, bodies lay in the corridors. And yet the violence wasn't slowing, it was spreading. Now, it wasn't just gang against gang, it was everyone for themselves. And in that terrifying moment, a new danger appeared, one that no inmate had expected. The sun began to rise, casting a faint orange glow through the smoke-filled skylights. For a moment, it looked like calm might return, but then came the sound that froze everyone, the distant hiss of gas canisters being fired into the prison. Outside forces were finally making their move. Tear gas rolled through the hallways, choking everyone in its path. Prisoners coughed violently, their eyes burning. Some dropped their weapons and fell to the floor, gasping for air. Others fought through it, wrapping wet rags around their faces, refusing to give up the fight. But the gas wasn't the only threat. The fire set during the night had spread to parts of the building. Smoke and flames now climbed the walls, cutting off escape routes. Inmates trapped inside screamed as the heat grew unbearable. Survival meant moving or burning alive. Amid the panic, gang alliances started to crumble. Leaders turned on each other, accusing rivals of leading the gas toward their blocks. Men who once fought side by side now clashed with knives and fists, betrayal spreading faster than the flames. The trapped guard in the storage shed saw his chance. As the inmates around him scattered from the gas, he kicked the door open and sprinted out, coughing and staggering toward the main yard. But he wasn't alone. 3 prisoners spotted him and gave chase, determined to catch the only surviving officer inside. Meanwhile, the medical unit was still under siege. The wounded begged for help, coughing from the gas, but their cries went unanswered. Prisoners, desperate to escape, pushed through the unit, trampling over anyone in their way. The line between enemy and ally vanished. It was every man for himself. And then, as chaos reached its peak, a deafening sound shook the prison. An explosion. A gas line had burst, tearing through part of the east wing. Dust, fire, and screams filled the air. Walls crumbled, ceilings collapsed. In that moment, the riot was no longer just about control. It was about survival against fire, gas, and collapsing walls. The blast ripped the prison apart. Bricks and metal rained down as fire roared through the east wing. Prisoners stumbled through the smoke, their screams mixing with the crackle of collapsing walls. What was once a prison riot had now turned into a full-scale disaster zone. Those who survived the explosion clawed their way out of the rubble, covered in dust and blood. Some tried to help the injured, dragging them toward safer ground. Others stepped over the fallen, more focused on saving themselves. In the lawless chaos, compassion was a luxury few could afford. The trapped guard, still running from the prisoners chasing him, was thrown to the ground by the shockwave. For a brief second, he thought it was over. But when he opened his eyes, the men were still behind him, angrier than ever. He scrambled to his feet, gasping, his radio crackling with static. Meanwhile, rival gangs used the destruction as an opportunity. With the East Wing in ruins, they pushed deeper into each other's territory. Battles raged in smoke-filled corridors, the clash of steel echoing through the rubble. Prisoners swung makeshift weapons blindly, unable to see more than a few feet ahead. The fire spread fast. Whole sections of cells were swallowed by flames. The air grew hotter and heavier. Men pounded on locked doors, coughing, begging for escape. Their screams rose above the chaos, haunting anyone who heard them. On the rooftops, a handful of inmates found a way out. They climbed through broken skylights and onto the prison's roof, waving makeshift flags and shouting at the helicopters circling above. Some begged for rescue. Others taunted the police outside, daring them to storm the prison. And then, the sound everyone feared, gunfire. Shots echoed from somewhere deep inside the prison. No one knew who fired first, but it didn't matter. The prison riot had crossed another line. Now, it wasn't just fists, flames, or knives. The deadliest prison riot in America had turned into open warfare. The first shots rang out, echoing through the prison like thunder. Prisoners dove for cover, some pressing against walls, others hiding behind overturned tables. No one knew where the bullets came from, whether it was desperate guards, inmates who had stolen guns, or both. But one thing was clear: the riot had entered a deadly new stage. Panic swept through the blocks. Men who had once been fearless fighters suddenly scrambled for safety. Some gangs pulled back, dragging their wounded with them. Others pressed forward, blinded by rage. Blood pooled across the floors as the prison's corridors turned into kill zones. Outside, heavily armed response teams surrounded the compound. Snipers took positions on rooftops. Officers in riot gear lined up behind shields, waiting for the order to storm in. Helicopters circled above, their spotlights cutting through the smoke. The world outside was watching, and pressure was mounting for the state to end the chaos. Inside, survival grew more desperate. Food was gone, water almost dry, and smoke filled every hallway. Prisoners coughed as they stumbled through the haze, their eyes burning. The heat from the fires made the air itself feel like it was on fire. But giving up wasn't an option. Surrender meant facing rival gangs, or worse, brutal revenge. The trapped guard, still being hunted, finally reached the yard. He collapsed against a wall, bleeding and exhausted. His pursuers closed in, weapons raised. But just as they were about to strike, a spotlight from a helicopter blinded them. The guard shielded his eyes, unsure if this was salvation or the beginning of the end. Back in the East Wing ruins, gangs fought in the rubble with savage intensity. One side gained ground only to be pushed back. Men screamed, others fell silent forever. Then a voice boomed through the loudspeakers outside the prison. "This is the state response unit. Lay down your weapons. You have 5 minutes before we come in." The order echoed across the burning compound. Some inmates froze, others laughed, mocking the threat, but deep down, everyone knew what was coming next. The real storm had yet to arrive. The prison yard was silent for the first time in hours. Inmates froze as the booming voice echoed through the smoke. "Lay down your weapons. This is your final warning." The 5-minute countdown ticked away in everyone's minds. Some clutched their makeshift blades tighter. Others whispered prayers, knowing what was about to come. Inside the control room, commanders gave the order. Outside, armored vehicles rolled forward. Floodlights blasted across the walls. Dozens of heavily armed officers lined up at the gates, shields raised, rifles ready. Helicopters roared above, their spotlights cutting through the rising smoke. The siege had begun. Back inside, panic tore through the gangs. Some leaders shouted to keep fighting. "We own this place now," while others urged surrender, knowing the odds. The debate turned violent. Fists flew, knives flashed. Inmates weren't just fighting the state, they were fighting each other over whether to resist or survive. The trapped guard in the yard raised his head as the gates finally burst open. Flash bangs exploded, flooding the air with blinding light and deafening booms. Inmates staggered, clutching their ears as heavily armed officers stormed inside, shields clashing, rifles pointed. Chaos exploded instantly. Prisoners charged the riot squad with pipes and bats, only to be met with rubber bullets and gas grenades. The yard turned into a war zone. Shadows of men running through smoke, flashes of gunfire cutting across the darkness, screams echoing as both sides clashed. In the East Wing ruins, the gun battle grew fiercer. Officers pushed block by block, dragging the wounded out and slamming prisoners to the ground. Some inmates fought to the bitter end. Others dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, their faces streaked with blood and ash. And then came the darkest moment yet. A fireball erupted from the kitchen as flames met stored fuel. The explosion shook the ground, sending both officers and prisoners sprawling. The roof above groaned, beams cracking. dust raining down. The prison itself was collapsing, becoming a death trap for everyone still inside. The ground shook as the kitchen erupted, flames tearing through the walls. Smoke and dust swallowed the air. Prisoners and officers alike fell to the ground, ears ringing, eyes wide with terror. For the first time, it didn't matter who wore the uniform. Everyone inside was fighting the same enemy, the collapsing prison. Chunks of ceiling crashed down in the east wing. Metal bars twisted and fell like spears. Inmates scrambled through the debris, coughing and choking as they searched for a way out. Some clawed at blocked staircases, while others kicked down doors that had been locked for years. Every second meant life or death. In the yard, officers regrouped, forming a shield wall to push forward, but the prisoners, blinded by panic, charged in all directions. Some fought desperately, swinging weapons with no target in mind. Others simply ran, trampling anyone in their way. The riot had transformed into pure survival chaos. The trapped guard, bloodied and weak, stumbled toward the broken tower stairs. He looked back. His pursuers were still there, refusing to let him escape, but now the tower itself shook, its walls splitting apart. If he climbed, he risked falling with the building. If he stayed, the inmates would tear him apart. Inside the infirmary ruins, wounded prisoners begged for help. Smoke filled the hall, their voices hoarse and broken. Some who could still walk dragged the injured toward shattered windows, hoping to wave down the officers outside. But the flames spread too quickly, swallowing beds, supplies, and cries for mercy. On the rooftops, a group of inmates used ropes and sheets to lower themselves down the outer walls. Searchlights from helicopters tracked them. Some shouted for surrender, raising their hands in the air. Others made a desperate run across the roof, refusing to give up, even as snipers zeroed in. Then came the moment that silenced everyone. A deafening crack tore through the prison as a section of the main roof gave way, collapsing into the cell block below. Dust and screams exploded upward. Men vanished into the rubble. The deadliest prison riot in America was no longer just a riot. It was a full-scale disaster, and the countdown to total collapse had begun. Dust choked the air as the roof collapsed into the cell block below. Screams echoed under the rubble. Flames licked up the broken beams, turning the ruins into an inferno. Both inmates and officers froze for a moment, stunned by the sheer destruction, before the chaos surged again. Commanders outside gave the order, "Take it by force." Riot teams stormed the remaining blocks, shields up, rifles raised. Flashbangs thundered, filling the prison with blinding light. Prisoners staggered back, some throwing makeshift weapons, others dropping to their knees in surrender. The takeover was reaching its breaking point. But not everyone gave up. In the yard, a hardened gang leader rallied his men for one last stand. With pipes, blades, and stolen gear, they charged the officers like a desperate army. Shots cracked, smoke exploded, bodies fell on both sides, as the yard turned into a battlefield drenched in fear and fury. Elsewhere, small groups of inmates abandoned the fight. Some crawled through holes in the walls. Others waved their hands high, shouting, "We give up." Officers tackled them to the ground, zip-tying their hands. For many, survival now meant surrender, no matter the cost. The trapped guard in the tower finally collapsed to his knees. The prisoners chasing him were too weak, too injured to continue. He stumbled toward the riot squad, coughing, eyes swollen from smoke. Against all odds, he had survived the longest night of his life. By dawn, the prison was unrecognizable. The east wing lay in ruins, the yard soaked in blood, walls charred black by fire. Helicopters circled above as stretchers carried out the wounded. Dozens of inmates lay dead. Dozens more shackled and lined up in the dirt. The riot was over, but the scars would never fade. Reporters outside shouted questions. Officials gave stiff statements, calling it a tragedy, a failure, a warning. But inside the minds of those who lived it, the memory of that night would last forever. A night when survival came at any cost, and the deadliest prison riot in America showed the world what happens when order collapses into chaos. The riot ended with sirens fading into the distance, but its shadow never left. Walls were rebuilt, cells cleaned, and officials promised it would never happen again. Yet for those who lived it, the prisoners who fought to survive, the guards who barely made it out, and the families who waited for answers, those scars will never heal. America calls them correctional facilities, but on nights like this, they reveal a darker truth. Inside these walls, survival is often worth more than life itself. The deadliest prison riot wasn't just about violence, it was about desperation, betrayal, and the thin line between order and collapse. And the haunting question remains, if it happened once, what's stopping it from happening again? So, what do you think? Was this riot a failure of the system, or was it inevitable from the start? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next story might be even darker than this one.